Welcome to Banking to Go by Algebra Labs, your takeaway insights from the world of financial technology and banking, served by today's industry leaders. My name is Nizamuddin, your host for today's episode, where we discuss how to defeat online disinformation and manipulation with Amil and Fergus McKenzie-Wilson, CEO and CTO of Valent. Gentlemen, welcome. I am delighted that we have Valent Projects and not Valent, as I tried to ruin your name. Joining us today, you are a British company headquartered in London that discovers, monitors and counters threats from all forms of online manipulation in real time using your proprietary AI technology. Is that correct?
It is, thank you very much. And it's a West London company, so we're very excited about being here in East London.
I know, it's a great mission and endeavor to be here. Thank you for joining us. So let's begin by, disinformation is on the rise. We hear it all the time, from elections through to online fraud. How are we defining disinformation for you guys from a technical standpoint?
So overall, I think Fergus will be able to say from a technical point of view, but overarchingly, disinformation, there is a word used, there's a description in the world of researchers who work on this stuff, which is that it's purposefully false information for some kind of benefit, political or economic. But at the same time, disinformation is used now in popular discourse to mean anything from information I don't like, stuff I don't agree with, to stuff that's more aligned with the actual official word. So disinformation, when we talk about it, we most of the time are referring to online manipulation. So manipulation when something is purposefully wrong and you're attempting to manipulate people. So when we use the phrase online manipulation, but disinformation, just popularly when we're chatting, that's what people understand.
And Fergus, anything to add? And where does fake news come into this, which is something that we hear in more common parlance?
Well, as we were saying, there's two flavors to it. There's the source of the information, which, if knowingly false, with significant intent to convince people of something that they know is not true, then that's just the start. It's more to do with the propagation then. So where the technical side comes into this is very much the distribution patterns and the distribution method. So you have people running, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of fake accounts on various social media platforms, running fake websites that pretending to be news agencies, particularly in the Middle East. That's a problem. Fake news websites, we've seen a lot of those. And then all of this together, amplifying the false information to give that kind of impression that there's sort of that peer validation, that other people believe this, therefore I should believe this, and also at the same time creating a massive reach that otherwise wouldn't be present with something that's quite obviously false.
We naturally have this validation online. If a X number of people are following an account, that must mean it's real. And so, but we never think about qualifying what the quality of those followers are.
Where does that number come from?
Exactly. So why, I guess, is it on the rise? Can we unpack that for a second before we start zeroing in on finance and banking? Why is it? What does it feel? This is the other challenge, right? Like, it feels like this has been on the rise for a while now. Is this because we have bad actors who are just better at it now? Is it adoption of technology? Like, why is it that this is now on the rise? And what's the prediction for the next 10 years' time? What will it look like?
So it's been, it is on the rise, and the reason is, and it's been on the rise for a while, and the reason is that our world has changed technologically, culturally. People argue about which one led the other, but ultimately the big change has been that for maybe 50 or 60 years, from sort of the 1900s to sort of 1980s, 1990s, information was primarily top down. The cost of producing and disseminating information was high, which meant governments or big organizations had pretty much a monopoly on it. And if you think of a big organization putting out a press release and then giving it to the BBC or a big organization like that, NBC in the States, big state broadcasters, And then that information went downwards to people who could only watch it a couple of hours a day at set times. And there was no mechanism for their views to go back up the chain. It was a one-way system. So digital, meaning everything from satellite media, that changed it in terms of now your information sources weren't just national, they were international. CNN went all over. Video cameras became smaller, so the cost kept going down and the reach kept going up to the point where we are now. Social media is a big driver of that now. Information flows backwards, forwards, all over. People who generate it are also people who disseminate it. People who consume it also then react to it, and then the likes of the BBC will react again. So the whole kind of information flows, which is really what I've looked at since the start of my career, are vastly different. And like with everything, that means they're open to manipulation. There's many more points in which you can get in to manipulate them.
Unfortunately, it's very much like a growing industry. So there are a lot of companies out there, well, maybe not officially registered companies, but still trading entities that offer disinformation as a service. So whether that's fake reviews on Amazon, whether that's fake likes, fake followers on Instagram or other platforms, it's widespread because there's a demand for it, because people see the opportunity there. One man's problem is another man's opportunity. They see the opportunity there to gain something that they otherwise wouldn't have through a somewhat illegitimate means that they can pay for.
And is the source of this primarily that we are spending more time online, right? Like, I mean, at the heart of it, they say we become the customer of the big companies because of the data that they have on us. So is the source of this activity partly because we are online all the time, consuming information constantly, whether it's on Instagram with the reels, or is that part of it? Because there wouldn't be a supply, a massive supply of companies providing these services if there wasn't some form of demand, I guess, through consumers.
Absolutely. So the changes in the technology have meant that it's now possible to commoditize and sell our attention. And you'll hear marketers talk about it, and all these things are linked. You'll hear online marketers say it's all about getting attention. It's all about, it's a constant sort of thing in the world of marketing. So the world of disinformation is adjacent in some ways. They're also looking for, their ultimate aim is the same. The methodologies they're using are dodgy. If our attention is commoditized, our attention is valuable, because then we make purchases, we choose governments, we do various things, then the ability to influence that is then also valuable. So, which is why it's going to get worse and worse.
Amil, you, journalism background, amazing work with government, private actors. Fergus, you've been an engineer, specialist in AI and machine learning. We're doing this during the Euros, right? So bring it home, guys, we won't say where we are at the point. And there was a video that went viral of Gareth Southgate giving a press conference. It reached millions, and I watched it, and I watched the comments underneath being like, this is despicable behavior, this is not befitting of the English manager. And he was just like spouting terrible things. It was completely a fake, right? They were so good, and that's today. How much better will these deep fakes get in, say, 5 years' time?
Oh, well, it's with any application of machine learning, or particularly machine learning, the benchmark is always the human. So it takes a while to achieve the level of the human, depending on how good the human is at the given task. So, for example, with self-driving, humans are very, very good at driving cars. So it's taken a while to achieve that level. I would say we're getting pretty close now. But then once that level is exceeded, that's when the human starts to not make sense anymore, if you get me. So in terms of video generation, we've still got a bit further to go, I'd say, until we've achieved the same level of what a human can achieve with, an editing suite and, a studio and all the tools that a human normally has available. But then once that point is reached, the next point where it will kind of tip over to the point where people don't really look to the traditional method of doing it anymore, and they go with the machine learning option, is where that point is then exceeded. That's the inflection point where it effectively blows up. We've seen that a few times.
And Amil, your thoughts? I mean, we're seeing it in election cycles. You know, we're in 2024. We saw an audio of the Mayor of London days before his election. In the general elections, we saw a number of audio fakes come out, and I'm certain we're going to see a lot more leading up to the US elections. Like, these are really impacting people's lives. So let me pivot to financial services and maybe start with that consumer first. How is disinformation affecting financial services from the work that you've been doing?
At the moment, it's at the start, and the trend lines are worrying. So in the US, we've seen disinformation fueled short selling. So false information used in quite complex multi-tiered strategies to hit banks, regional banks in the US. From the work we've done, we've seen 14 get hit. 4 banks ultimately failed. And the authorities in the US have talked about their concern about this scenario. Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, has talked about the risk here in the UK. We monitor for that as well, because these kind of methodologies are quite easy to enact. And the situation that unfolded around GameStop was really a watershed, because you could see different actors went, oh, there's potential here. Again, you know, our attention, the benefit that you can get out of it, you know, how you can exploit it. Multiple actors, not necessarily political, which is what we were seeing before, but just straight up financial, maybe criminal, some mix of the two, seeing that, oh, okay, this is something that could work for us. There's potential to make a lot of profit here. And the technology behind it, unlike deepfakes, is not particularly complex. The strategy of it is sophisticated, but you can go online on the dark web and find software to do it.
Unpack that for us, right? So I think we all saw what happened with GameStop. We saw, and interestingly, the way it was articulated was a new generation of young people, many of whom had parents who were affected by the financial crisis and subprime mortgages, who were really upset, and they wanted to stick one up to these hedge funds, right? That's the narrative that came out. But there's obviously more complexity behind the scenes. So the short selling of these mid-sized regional banks, like, break down for us what that looks like, and maybe from who's being targeted, what does it look like? And then would love to hear the solution that you've built, because ultimately that's what's really exciting here. You built your own AI proprietary technology, Ariadne. So maybe if you could unpack what it looks like for listeners and viewers who maybe just haven't experienced this yet, and hopefully won't, but in case they do.
So the way we call them informational threats. So like a cyber threat, but the information ecosystem around you is changing, and that's the threat, instead of somebody sort of coming in to try and penetrate your defenses. And the way it would seem, if you are on the receiving end of it, would start with maybe some innocuous picture. So we'll take a real world example, a picture of people lining up just on the street, and it's posted on, let's say, Twitter, maybe Reddit, could be elsewhere, with the description, oh, here is a picture of people lining up outside Bank X to withdraw their money because it's about to collapse. And that will then be promoted by the kind of networks of bots that Fergus mentioned, so a lot of people are seeing it. And even if a lot of people aren't seeing it, enough people are seeing it to make the markets sort of panic about it. Once that happens, then you'll get another stage and another stage. So it could be that if the stock market price actually is hit, if the stock price is hit, then they'll capture that. So that's not disinformation anymore. That'll just be a fact, but it's part of the process. So there's just literally a screen grab, maybe just off Google, look at the price go down, maybe look at the price stopped, or if there's a trading halt, that's a big one. And then that will be promoted. And the aim is to carry on promoting and to use the branding or the positioning of the entity itself, the bank, to harm it. So if its advertising, for example, shows a lot of wealthy people in California, the attacks will suggest that it gives out easy loans, therefore its deposits are insecure. It's giving easy loans to rich people, this kind of thing. So it's sophisticated in that sense, and the initial warning signs that you might see might seem really minor. It might just be a picture that not that many people see, but that's the first sign, and it'll go on. And they will continuously test narratives. What hurts the most? What hurts the bank the most? And they'll be looking for the metric. They'll be looking at the metrics to see what's really resonating. And it's a principle that comes from marketing, A/B testing. You know, whenever we talk to PR companies, oh yeah, we get A/B testing. This is narrative testing. It's the same kind of thing. And the assets, the digital assets they're using could be. We've seen all of this. We've seen pictures that don't actually have the bank in question in there, and people just look at it and panic. We don't realize there's nothing showing the actual bank. They just take it at face value. It could be now a AI generated picture, and people won't stop long enough to look at it. Sometimes it's actually those AI sort of cartoonish pictures, but it carries the same emotional sort of hit. So it does the same thing. And sometimes it's just a stock photo that they've just got off, you know, a stock sharing site and just put it in there. Sometimes it's misrepresented. So it'll be people sheltering from rain. So all of those, that's why we don't focus too much on, is it disinformation, misinformation? It's manipulation.
Because the impact is real.
Yeah.
And Fergus, from a technical perspective, it's very clear what the problem is. How do you solve for it?
So the main opportunity for innovation we've seen is the fact that the institutions aren't aware of this happening when it's happening, if that makes sense. And they're being led by the threat actors rather than themselves taking the lead and actually proactively managing the situation and understanding what's going on. So obviously that hasn't ended well for them in the recent history. Every institution we've spoken to that has been under attack was not aware of the attack and was not aware of the opportunities to improve the situation that we were able to uncover through going through the data retrospectively, obviously, and showing them, hey, there was an opportunity here to reinforce this narrative, or this thing should have been addressed, absolutely, which was not addressed. And they just had absolutely no clue. And they didn't even realize that it was being artificially amplified at the time. They thought it was 100% organic. But I think if the response time to actually put together a strategy to mitigate, because they'll see the deposits being withdrawn, and that's what they respond to. But they don't realize why the deposits are being withdrawn. They start fighting it in terms of, trying to get more liquidity. And trying to effectively put a band-aid on a bleeding wound, whereas they're not addressing the source of the issue, and that's something we can help with. That's what we've built Ariadne to do.
And apart from being deeply cynical, if I'm senior manager in a bank, and what we're describing here, and I think this is where it gets really exciting, the possibilities for neobanks and the future of digital banking, because we can prepare and design to address this from the very beginning. And I want to touch on that. But if you're in a traditional high street bank, a mid-sized bank in say the US or in the UK, apart from being cynical, how do you prepare for this, right? Like, so where would you begin from a company perspective? Do you start training people? Do you start, thinking about softwares? Where do you start? Where do you begin? Because I think a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, this makes sense, but what do I do? Where do I go? And the easy answer is obviously to use Valent.
I was going to start with that. That would be the first place to start. But I would say along with that, we talk to clients and potential clients about we don't just, here's the tool and off you go. We talk to them about how they can integrate it in what they do. So I would say as somebody who's worked in communications, there is a structural issue as well. So communications in a big organization particularly has traditionally been a function of putting information out, but it's the only unit in an organization that has the tools and the people who sort of think in sort of informational terms. And so now they're at the front line of these kind of threats coming in, but the structure of the organization isn't attuned to them being the people who say, look, we see this coming and it's a threat. So that's not generally their role. So they don't have the right authorities, and they don't have sway in the right places, and the lines of communication internally aren't quite there. So we can give people the tool for them to see incoming threats. But then what do they do with that is often a challenge. So those are the two key things.
Yeah. Anything to add, Fergus?
I think it all comes down to the monitoring and the capability to monitor, and also to know what to look for. So I think for everyone in that position should study what happened to First Republic, because it may have been the first, but it won't be the last. It definitely won't be.
Not the band. This is the bank.
The bank, First Republic, the
There's
bank.
a band called First Republic.
Oh, sorry. No. We definitely mean the bank. Because effectively it was, it didn't have many fundamental issues. It was, they were managing it well. It wasn't like Signature Bank, where it was really poorly managed. They were managing it well, and they were effectively, there was a narrative risk due to contagion because of what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, and that was the opportunity of using that narrative against them was exploited, and that's what killed them. But unless you're monitoring for things like this, you will never see it coming.
So can I ask you, at the heart of all of this, we're talking about institutions, but really what we're describing is behavior of people. Because if you have enough, if you get to one person and you convince them that there's an issue, and we are, deeply protective of our money. Money is a very important, precious thing in our lives. It's what allows us to provide for our families and buy nice things and everything else. If that's at risk, we are willing to do whatever it takes to protect that, right? And if that means withdrawing all of my savings, and you get one, you convince a few more, and then it's a swarm, right? Now, how do you build resilience in a consumer base? Because I think this is what's really interesting from a consumer protection perspective. We work in fintech, in digital banking, and any digital bank, neobank in the UK or in the West will tell you, the first 3 months of operation, you have scammers hitting you hard because they're expecting you not to have built from design good AML, good KYC, and will often use tactics that you're describing in a very small way. Now, if you're a small fintech and you're new and you're bootstrapping or got new funding, a few tips maybe of how you can help build resilience in both the team, but also start thinking about how can we start building better resilience in our consumers in our society. What can society do to build better resilience? And I know there's going to be, you get better here, the bad actors become more sophisticated here. It's a constant battle now, right? It's a new playground. But what can people do at the foundational level, one, and then two, if you're a digital bank or a startup, what are the steps that you can start taking to think about not falling prey to some of this quite pernicious tactics?
On the first point, I would say I'm a big believer in reverse engineering the methodologies of bad guys. So in the world that we are in, what the threat actors are really good at using psychology. And disinformation and information is a big part of it. Is psychology. What we do is based on the idea that you have to have psychology and the technology together. Successful social media platforms work in the same way. So two key psychological models that work on disinformation is social proof. Sunk costs is another. I'm sure there's a couple more as well. So in that principle, as Fergus was saying, if people see other people, if they get the impression other people take money out, they'll want to take money out. That's the social proof element. Also, who are the people that they're seeing? Is it a friend? Is it somebody they trust, etc.? And then there's sunk costs. So that operates often in another way. You double down on something that you've already, invested resource or time, mental resource or financial resource in. So I would look at how we can use those mental models, but within a customer base. So a communications team, I think, inevitably, as the problem grows, we work on the tool side, but I think the role of communications teams needs to change, how they're situated inside organizations and the models that they use to do their work. So resilience is not something generally talked about now in comms teams. Nobody says, guys, go and build resilience in our customer base. But those are the kind of things I think they should be thinking about.
That's exactly it, right? What you're saying is future
digital banks from design and need to think about investing in the right people, informational threats. So comms team is no longer just marketing saying, hey, use my product, but rather the comms team should also start thinking about, do I have an eye on monitoring? Do I have the right products in place, monitoring what's being said about my company in case there's some active coordinated attempt? Okay, let me ask you this, which I know I've asked you before. It's my favorite topic. What the bad guys do in terms of like tools, can the good guys use similar tactics for like, if I'm a new bank and I want to use some tools, right, to tell people I have a great product, is that doable? Is it ethical is a different question, but...
So is it doable? Yes. How you do it for maximum impact is the question. And I would start from the point of view that disinformation is essentially a synthetic version of authentic interest, right? Authentic interest is the thing. That is, the powerlifter who goes to gym and, multiple times a day and eats endless chicken and, is healthy and strong. And then steroids is the synthetic version, which might look good, but at some point it's going to stop working. But there are things along the way that you can use. For example, what bad guys are really good at is understanding where real attention is and then adjusting. So it's a good comms principle. Put your stuff out there and then adjust and keep going. And any good strategy, has that loop in it. Bad guys do that, and they do that very well. So that in A/B testing. And whenever we talk, it's funny, I was saying we talk to PR companies and they get, straight away, they might not know anything about disinformation, but they'll say, oh, they're A/B testing. Yeah, but then you can talk to a bank, they'll, somebody more senior, maybe a different, area of the bank, maybe compliance, or maybe legal, which are actually tasked with threats. And you say A/B testing or narrative testing, and they have no idea what that is. So you can use those kind of principles, put out your own comms, see what works, do your own narrative testing, nothing stopping an organization doing that.
I think one of the main principles, from studying this for the last 18 months or so, that I've noticed is, although disinformation, is a powerful tool, definitely, for threat actors, I've yet to see it exceed the power of, in terms of, measuring, what exactly is communication power, in terms of impact on audience sentiment and reach. Those are the two metrics I'd say are important to look at from the technical point of view. It's impossible to beat organic viral content in terms of reach and impact on audience sentiment with, inauthentically amplified disinformation. And everyone has access to that. So, why would you, exactly like you're saying, why would you go for the steroids when you can just go for the diet and exercise, which will produce long-lasting results and also doesn't expose you to risks such as maybe people figuring out exactly how the content was promoted and then the threat actors maybe uncovering that and using it against you. There's those then risks that are narrative risks that are generated in the process. Obviously, you have a reputation as an organization, as an entity, that you must protect. The threat actors that may be working against you, they're unknown. They don't have a reputation. So they can play by a different rule book. You have to, if that makes sense.
You have to win 100% of the time.
Yeah.
They have to just win once, right, ultimately. It's a very hopeful way, Fergus, of saying, it's a very hopeful way of ending, actually, is how I'll say it. Because I think what you just said is ultimately, there will be disinformation out there, there'll be informational threats out there, but actually good organic content which speaks to people's interests is of paramount importance. And so whilst we are moving into a world where there will be no doubt a lot more concern from consumers to banks at a more systemic level, there are some very particular steps that we can take. So we've painted a pretty good picture of what potential neobanks, future banks should be thinking about in terms of consumers and institutions. What does the future look like? That a lot of new entities and players are going to be operating in? What is the future of the internet, I guess?
So obviously there's a vast array of possibilities when talking about the future, but one that's particularly relevant and becoming somewhat statistically probable in our field is the dead internet theory. And the dead internet theory is effectively, if you look at the stats, the number of bots online increase year after year, every year. And the proportion of internet traffic in terms of terabits of traffic increases every year, year after year after year. So where does that end up? Where does that, nothing can increase forever. What would be the inflection point, the upper inflection point? It's a point where there are so many bots online, there's so much fake traffic, inauthentic activity, that you don't expect to encounter humans anymore when you use the internet as a human. And what happens then? People start to disengage. And that's a very, it's a very sad reality that we are unfortunately heading towards year after year, where the internet fundamentally, as a tool for humans to communicate with each other over vast distances extremely effectively and exchange information, will no longer be effective because there won't be enough humans on it as a proportion of total traffic.
This is the equivalent of people going back to vinyls, or people giving up on Amazon and going back into bookstores. It's interesting. Really fascinating thought for us to end our conversation on. Amil, Fergus, thank you so much for the work that you do. I think it's incredible, and for painting a picture that I'm almost certain that a lot of people working in the world of fintech and building new banks haven't really been thinking about, but something that's actually crucial. If you're future-proofing a digital bank of the future, you can't do that without informational threads and operating in maybe not the dead of the internet, but a future where actually you have a lot of competing theories, interests, fake news, disinformation out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.